Everyone. Today we continue to see what we have begun yesterday on our strategic planning process. As I just mentioned yesterday, there are 7 phases for our strategic planning process. Today we continue to discuss on first phase, which speaks about get ready for our strategic planning. So this is all about a planning process for us to begin with this strategic planning process. And phase 2 is about articulating mission, vision, and the core values. Phase 3, assessing your situation. And phase 4, agrees on priorities. Phase 5, writing the plan. Phase 6, implementing the plan. And phase 7, it's evaluating and monitoring the plan. So today we just continue to look at on the first phase, which is ready for strategic planning process. In this strategic planning process in phase 1, there are 5 steps that we need to know and we need to take note of it. Especially in this first phase, in step 1, the first thing that what we need to do is that identify the reason for planning. So in the planning process, we need to identify the right reasons. Knowing the right reasons and identifying the right reasons could help us at least to come up with a proper planning. And this is the initial stage for anyone who wants to do a strategic planning. Under this, we can just mention some of the things that's very important for our strategic planning process. Especially in order to identify the reasons for planning, first we need to do that, list your expectations. And these expectations at least should cover the success that we are looking for at the completion of our planning process. So as I said, we are in the planning process, and we need to think what expectation do we have as we are just thinking our organization where to go, and once we just go there, what we do expect and what do we want to see as we are going to achieve. So that's something that we need to just come across and with a list of things as expectations that we do have. Yesterday, I asked you in class, what do you expect from this class? You may come up with so many answers for that. And similarly, in our strategic planning, we just begin to think those expectations, and those expectations might help us at least to come up with a proper planning. And at the second point in this planning process, beyond expectation, we need to also come up with identifying key questions. Those key questions should address the long term of our expectation that we are going to achieve and that we want to see, and the success that we want to see. So those questions should address those expectations that we will be meeting or expecting. In the same time, those operational questions as well, and in the mid-term, short-term, and long-term. So we need to come up with different questions, and those questions will be leading questions for us to find out the reasons for our planning process. And the third thing that we need to know that clarify any issues are negotiable and non-negotiable. There are issues to be negotiable, and there are issues not to be negotiable. So for that reason, we need to come across, at least to know those issues very clearly in the planning process. Once we identify those kind of things, and once we have come across to know them, it might ease our planning process. Again, and one of the things that we do not forget is that we need to realize 4 major strategic issues for any organization. As you can see, those issues will be, it's a mission. What does it mean? How well are we achieve our mission with programs, and it might have a greater impact in our planning. So similarly with expectation, as we have identified those expectations, and again, this mission should align with those expectations. So how well are we achieving our mission? With different programs, with different units, and at the same time, what kind of greater impact could happen, bring. So in any organization, if we do not just come up with those issues, we may not produce good materials or plan in one way or the other. And again, the second point is that issues that we need to address is that finances. And this is very important, particularly any organization to be stable and at the same time sustainable, the finance is very important. So we need to know those sources, financial sources, that might back up our strategic plan. Even in this strategic process, we need certain amount of finances to support in any for consultation and for advisory group, and even to come up together to work towards those planning process. We need finances, and again, that's where we need to think about. So in any organization should address those financial issues. And third one is just administrative capacity. So what does it mean? This is particularly how do we have people who can run the organization effectively and efficiently, who is going to do with the administrative role and the capacity so that our planning process should be and will be effective and efficient. So this is not only for the planning process, but even afterwards, that where we can just think, and that how the research actually also shows that we need to consider this as well. And the other one is governance, and how effective is the board and protecting the public interest. So these are in the first steps that we need to just consider, particularly in the planning process. So make sure that the expectations and long and short-term questions and at the same time clarity, any issues, those are negotiable and non-negotiable. And at the same time, make sure that those issues to be addressed, mission, finance, administrative, and governance are the key issues, especially in our planning process as a first step. And from those 5 steps, and the second step is that once we have gathered that information and once we have come up with those lists, we need to proceed to the second step, step 2. And that step is set up your planning process for success. Alison mentions in his book on page 35, it says, a strategic planning process has its proper time and place in the life of an organization. Certain conditions must exist if a strategic plan is to be a creative, collaborative, successful endeavor. So it is important to be honest when analyzing an organization's readiness to plan. So this is what he says. So in this case, how can we set up our planning for success? In this step, we need to consider at least 2 important elements. That is committed leadership and sufficient information. So commitment with good leadership and at the same time with the sufficient information. What does it mean? Commitment and support and involvement from top leadership and at the same time from bottom to top, and with the hybrid or with the side. So this is one of the issues, especially we begin to set up our planning process for success. If you want to expect success, that's where we need to just begin that. So this is particularly how we can just do from the inside. And again, commitment to clarify roles and expectations for all participants within the organization. So as we are in the planning process, we need to come across to clarify roles and expectations for all participants in the planning process. This is very important. So if you do not just make it clear enough for the participants who are involved in the planning process, that minimizes our scope in one way or the other. So that's where we need to have commitment in this planning process. And the other one is willingness to gather information, the organization's strengths, weakness, and opportunity traits. So if you are not willing enough to see the strengths of the existing or the imagined project or plan, we may not succeed as we wish or as we do expect. And so for that reason, I hope when we are coming up with a new plan for our existing organization or company, we need to be willing enough to gather information about the organization's strengths, about the organization's weakness, about the organization's opportunity, and at the same time, threats and the challenge that the organization just has in one way or the other. So this might be about the current program, probably this is about the future needs of the organization, probably information regarding competitors, and at the same time, potential collaborators. So that's where we need to come up with to gather information about the organization. In the planning process, if you just give priority and on attention for this, we may succeed with it, and at the same time, we may produce a good planning process. So this right mixed variety of individuals on the planning committee is also important. If you just come up with variety of people, in other words, different people with different expertise and skills, if you just involve, if you are committed to invite many people as much as possible, that might give us good background to have enough information and at the same time to set up our planning process. Okay, that's the second step. And the third step, we need to come up with, to develop a plan for gathering information from internal and external stakeholders. So our stakeholders are very important to produce a good planning, strategic planning. So in our strategic planning process, we need to have just both internal and external stakeholders. Particularly, who are the stakeholders? Just in a simple way, stakeholders are anyone who can care for the organization, who can care about the organization for the success of the mission. So this is very important. So any person who has a desire, any person who wants to support, that's a stakeholder. And again, stakeholder, it's in this strategic plan, it's very important just to have with the level they can just participate and join us in this planning process. So in order to develop this plan and to gather information, we need to have both internal and external stakeholders, especially stakeholders as they do have different levels of participation in the strategic program. We need to look for at least in a leadership scale. So there might be people with a good expertise in the leadership. So this leadership, they will take the initiative to make important decisions. There are, in the planning process, there are issues that demands decision. And for that reason, we need to have such kind of people in a leadership scale in order to develop a good planning. And again, facilitators. What does it mean? And at the same time, we need to come up with what? Pay more attention on the planning process rather than content. So again, we need to facilitate in one way or the other. So this facilitation also needs what? A leadership skill in one way or the other. So giving more attention in the process, how the process might just go and fit well. And all those things might be something that to be considered in our planning process. And again, if there is an input, also we need to consider and providing information and opinions. We need to allow ourselves for different input from different groups of people so that they may just give us proper and needed information and their opinions. And we should never ignore if there is any kind of information from any stakeholders within the organization as we are thinking to produce a good planning plan. I'm sorry. So when we just see the internal stakeholders, we can see that executive director, if you do have executive director and the board of directors and the staff members within the organization and advisory boards, all those group or people are internal stakeholders. So we need to allow, when we are thinking this strategic planning, we need to put in this production of our plan. When we come to the external stakeholders, you can find over there clients. Our clients are external stakeholders and funders, government funders and regulators, and community leaders and partner organizations within the country and outside the country, individual donors and competitors even, and potential collaborators, and other agencies in parallel or related fields, previous staff and board members as well. So whenever we produce opportunities even for our previous staff and board members, then we might have good input, and those inputs might help us to bring a good proposal. In the same time, it gives us a ground for our planning process. Yeah, that's what it is all about. So apart from this internal and external stakeholders, we need to also look for what? Documents. And these documents will help us to develop what? To gather information. It helps us to give us more understanding. And this, for example, mission-related documents and financial documents. Whenever we are dealing with the finance, we need to come to see, at least refer those documents related with finance. How did it work? And what was the source for the finance? And how did they spend? All those things might help us in order to at least come up with a good planning process. So in the planning process, referring these documents might help us to come up with the necessary information so that we may be able to come up with a good information for the planning process. And again, administrative capacity documents, who administered, who managed, in the same time, how many personnel were there. And again, governance, what was the governance just look like of that organization? So gathering all information based on these documents might help us to come up with what? A proper documentation and a planning process. So that's the third step. And as I just mentioned, as we have in phase one, 5 steps, and the fourth step particularly comes with designing your strategic planning process to meet your organizational needs. And particularly when we come to this, in order to meet our organizational need, we need to come up with certain way of just identifying this process. In order to meet this organizational need, we need to come up with how to involve internal stakeholders. How do we just involve them? How can we just bring them as part of this planning process? Those managers at the top level, and again, those people at the bottom level. We can just bring and just work toward that. And again, how to involve external holders, not the insiders, the internal one, but at the same time, the external ones might help us. So this might help us at least to meet the organizational needs, because each and every one has something to contribute if you allow and give them the opportunity for that. And again, time and the level of intensity of the process. So how long this planning process will take us? 1 week, 1 month, 1 year? So it depends on the size of the organization. And for that reason, we need to also come up in order to, in a way that we can meet the need of the organization. And again, leadership of process and what kind of strategy we need to follow. Should we organize a committee in order to come up with a planning process? Should we find consultants? Should we just go for advisory group? Which way? So all those things might help us, especially in this step 4. And again, division of level assessment. And also planning discussion at different department unity. And also we need to allow for different people, for different departments, for different units, and by way and making assessment and at the same time giving response for different people might help us to meet the needs of the organization's need. And again, who will be the writer of the? Everybody does not write in the planning process. So if we assign someone, or if you come up with the right person, at least to produce and to do what we are just contributing from both internal and external, we need to allow someone, or we need to assign someone to write and at the same time jot and gather all our information together. And again, we need to again allow to use of a large group retreats in all possible ways. Especially the planning process is not an easy task. If you just away for a while, as a retreat or in a more quiet place with a different group of people, departments together, units together, and certain group at the top level management and at the bottom level, and with different group people. If you just allow people with different issues in this planning process, might help us to come up with, at least it takes us to the next step in a better way, so that we may able to come up with what? A good planning. So the way to inform stakeholders who do not deeply involved in the planning process is very important. That's where we need to, sometimes our stakeholders, some of the stakeholders may not aware of what we are just doing. So in that case, we need to also attempt to involve some of the stakeholders who are not part of our planning process. So that also that we need to come to facilitate in a such a way. So in order to meet your organizational needs, we need to just design, well, to have principles and values as well. So that's what we need to do in one way or the other. And how can we just come up with different group of people? And then in the first place, what we need to do that in this step, planning principles and values. What kind of principles? In a principle that's a kind of inclusive, including different group of people from all levels within the organization. So we don't need to ignore by saying he's not important, she's not important. So as much as possible, if we just have inclusiveness of our planning process, that might help us to have what? Good information. And at the end of the day, it helps us to meet the organizational need. And again, we need to also allow people and this planning process more in meaningful participation. That means staff for the real influence on the outcome of the plan. If the staff do not involve in our planning process, when we begin to implement what we have planned, we may not succeed at all. And for that reason, we need to just allow and at the same time encourage and motivate different groups of people within the organization to involve in a more and participate in a more meaningful way. And this also goes with this other point, which is share the work. So in this planning process, as we are trying to design to meet the organizational need, also we need to just share the work that we do have with others. And one person cannot do everything, and two persons cannot do all the things. So if we share different responsibilities and roles for different people in this planning process, might help us to see a big picture in our planning process. And again, we need to focus on the big picture. So looking the long term and the middle and the short. So looking at the big picture, having all the things that we have discussed so far might help us to bring a good planning process as we are dealing with. And the other one is just ownership. This is actually develop deep ownership of what? Mission, vision, critical issues, and the cooperative strategies. I think this is very important. Ownership is very important. Sometimes, just for the sake of producing a document, sometimes certain organizations, they do it. But with the feeling of ownership, when you just produce in such process, we may come up with a good thoughts and information for our next phases. So this is very foundational base and a phase when we take it very seriously. So everyone involved in the planning process should have basic understanding of what? Strategic planning. Everyone. And again, and what it can be done and what it cannot be done. So this is where we need to at least make it sure for the people who are just being involved in this planning process. So an overview of the language of the planning should be clear by all participants in this process. So we shouldn't just allow or make it clear the language of the planning only for 2 or 3 people. All the participants in the planning process should know what is going on. And that gives what? Ownership. That gives what? Success of our planning process. So that's what we need to at least cover in our planning process. So finally, in this planning process, what we need to do that once we have at least covered all the 4 steps, now we can come across with what? With the work plan. So remember, in first step, identify the reason for planning. Underneath, we have seen certain points, at least 4 points. And just expectation, just come up with expectations and ask questions, long-term questions and short-term operationals, and look for issues. Those are negotiable and non-negotiable. So that's the first thing. And second step was set up your planning process for success. And for third, it's developed for gathering information from internal and external stakeholders. And point 4, work towards what? To meet your organizational need. And once we have all the information over there, once we have done step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4, what we need to do is that just do all about come up with a good outline and just jot down. We have seen that in the step 4, come up with a right person to write what we have gathered. And then we can come up with what? It's outline, what we have done so far in the planning process. What we have produced, what we have discussed, what we have gathered, you can just outline. That takes us to the next step, to come up with what? The right mission statement, the right vision statement, and with the right goal, and with the right way of just what? Planning. So this is the foundation for us to see. And we have seen various activities. With these different activities that we did, we have gathered with this information. It can be an interview, it can be a retreat, it can be anything we can bring to outline what we have done. So this is step 5 in our first phase of strategic planning process. So if you do this, I think we just begin to produce a good strategy planning for the organizations that we are existing, or what they already for the existing organization or company, or for the organizations that we are just imagining. So that's how we can just begin to produce strategic planning. Thank you very much, and God bless you.